Hello, bros. We're back with Three Loves of Dostoevsky by Marc Slonim. And we are in chapter 5. Well, not chapter 5. I guess it's section 1, chapter 5. Section 5. I don't know what it is. 1955 book. I'm reading it lying down, so we'll see how good this goes. And we'll see if we also meet Maria finally. Two events made Dostoevsky's situation critical in 1847 and 48. The first blow was his fiasco with Peneva. He had not as much as dared to confess his love, so incongruous and impossible did it seem to him. He had to steel his heart and watch others paying court to her, rivals who went out of their way to make him look ridiculous. It is probable that his hatred for Turgenev dates from this time. The second blow was what used to be called a turn of the wheel of fortune. The intoxication of the unexpected success of Poor Folk passed quickly. The double, that prose poem of St. Petersburg, which he had hoped and believed was to surpass his first novel, pleased neither the public nor the critics. The reviews considered it a weak imitation of Gogol and overlooked all the concepts which the author had tried to put into it. A similar fate befell other short works which appeared in periodicals. The only ones considered comparable to his first brilliant experiment were White Nights, 1848, and Natasha Nesvanova, 1849. But by the time they appeared, their author was already immured in the fortress of Saints Peter and Paul. Reading worse than normal, and it's probably because I'm leaning here on the bed. He had a very hard time of it during his literary debacle. Envy, righteous self-esteem, and outburst of egotism alternated with depression and despair. Either he was comparing himself to Gogol and promising to show all of them that supremacy in literature would be his at last, or he was confessing with bitterness, I have horrible vices, boundless self-pride and ambition. To his feelings of injury, disenchantment, and self-doubt were now added material insecurity, debts, continual poverty, the need to find new ways of earning even a subsistence. The nagging work of a literary hack, translations, writing stories against advances, proofreading, paid off only in coppers. He was living in ill-concealed distress. He was lonely and neglected. Because of his nervous tension, physical exhaustion, disorderly way of life, and intensified work, Dostoevsky developed something in the nature of a psychopathological condition which he subsequently referred to more than once, even though in a rather guarded way. He described it in The Humiliated and Wronged. Little by little, with the coming of twilight, I began to fall into that spiritual state which I called mystic horror. This is a most serious, most excruciating fear of something I cannot define, something inconceivable and non-existent in the order of things, but which may inevitably become reality at any moment, as if to mock all the arguments of reason. The onslaughts of this mystic horror, so similar to the illumination preceding the convulsions of epilepsy, were followed by hypochondria and lethargy, accompanied by weakness and impotence. At times, however, he felt an irresistible need to forget himself at any cost. Since Dostoevsky did not drink, he could sink into oblivion only through gambling or women. Both in his psyche and his inexperience, these two were closely intertwined. In 1847 to 1849, he was leading a fantastic life filled with mystic alarms, soaring flights of ecstasy, and spasmodic falls into the abysses of the flesh. He was, of course, sublimating his inner conflicts by putting them into creative forms. The landlady, Natashka Nezvanova, and some short stories of this period supply extensive psychoanalytical material, but his hidden impulses found escape in life as well. There were certain real outlets for his passion: the taverns, gambling, and women. He tried them all during these painful years, and tried them with shame, with remorse for his lack of restraint, with self-flagellation for his dissoluteness. Many years later, the hero of Notes from the Underground, published in 1864 and translated here by B.G. Gurney, described his youth as follows. I was 24 at the time. My life was grim, disorderly, and lonely, to the verge of savagery even then. I kept away from everybody and even avoided speaking with others, burrowing further and further into my cubbyhole. At home, I read most of the time. Reading helped a great deal, of course. It agitated, delighted, and tormented me. But at times it became a frightful bore. After all, one wanted to be up and stirring, and I would suddenly plunge into dark, subterranean, vile depravity. No, not depravity, but depravitishness. My passionlets were acute, searing, because of my constant sickly irritability. The impulses were hysterical, accompanied by tears and convulsions. To top everything off, my melancholy would come to a boil. A hysterical avidity for incongruities, for contrast arose, and so I went in for depravity. I indulged in it of nights, furtively, timorously, feeling a shame which did not desert me even at the most loathsome moments, and which at such moments actually made me curse myself. I was frightfully apprehensive of being seen by some chance, of coming across somebody, of being recognized, and the haunts I frequented were quite shady. After all, it was a bore to sit twiddling one's thumbs, and so I went in for all sorts of dodges. I conjured up my own adventures and invented a life for myself so that I might at least have a taste of life somehow, but my streak of depravitishness would come to an end and I would feel dreadfully queasy. However, I had a device to reconcile all things. This was to flee into everything that was beautiful and lofty. In my dreams, of course, I was an awful dreamer. I dreamt for 3 months at a time, huddling there in my nook. But how much love, Lord, how much love I used to dream through in these dreams of mine. Nicholas Strakov, Dostoevsky's biographer, and his friend, maintains that the personages who resemble him most are the hero of Notes from the Underground, Svidrigailov in Crime and Punishment, and Stavrogin in The Possessed. The same critic speaks of Dostoevsky's animal lusts and of how dissolute he was. In addition, he was sentimental, disposed to sweet sentimentality and lofty and humane reveries. And these reveries are his literary muse and his main direction. Essentially, however, all his novels constitute self-justification, proving that all sorts of abominations can contrive to exist side by side with nobility of character. This is part of a letter to Leo Tolstoy, dated November 28, 1883, 2 years after Dostoevsky's death. Strakov added that in the biography which he was then preparing for the press, he could not, of course, refer to such traits in the personality of the great writer. Let truth perish, then. We shall show off only the right side of his life. Dostoevsky's humane dreams brought him face to face with all these problems, which he later explored in his novels. It was precisely during those painful years when he was a literary proletarian, working for none too generous employers, when he was straining under oppressive conditions and torn between beautiful and lofty impulses and suffocating abominations, as Strakov put it, that he began to be haunted by the problem of the daring personality and its right to freedom of action and even to crime. The question of evil in this world, of the religious reconstruction of humanity, of God, who had created all the torments and sufferings of our existence, and of the contradiction between moral ideas and the terrible political and social reality of Russia in 1848 and 1849, he found particularly agitating. Nevertheless, during this period when the historian sees but dead wood, bureaucracy, serfdom, and reaction, significant changes were secretly taking place in Russian society. Slavophiles and Westernizers argued about the destinies of the people and the mission of national culture, while the philosophers were helping the liberal intellectuals to form a system of general ideas. Public opinion expressed by censorship and police interdicts, I don't know the word, was more and more insistently turning to problems of the social and economic organization of the country and of political freedom. Dostoevsky, yielding to the mood of the intellectuals he was intimate with, was greatly taken up with humanitarian ideas and utopian socialism, especially as interpreted by the French. The plans of the Russian socialists blended in his imagination with hazy hopes for that particular logos which Russia had been preordained to utter to the world. These hopes made him feel with particular shame and pain the hideousness of everything around him, the arbitrariness of the authorities, the suffering of the poor, the crushed and degraded condition of the common people, and the cruel injustice of legalized serfdom moved him deeply. It was these very impulses that led him to join the Petrushevsky Circle, where the works of Saint-Simon, I will guess, Fourier and Owen were read aloud and discussed, to say nothing of Belinsky's famous letter to Gogol, in which the great critic reproached the author of Dead Souls with obscurantism, submission to the church, and the support of autocracy and slavery. At one of their gatherings, Dostoevsky delivered a speech on Lamennais, the Christian socialist, whose biblical and prophetic style was close to his own mystical strain, and his inspired words filled his listeners' eyes with tears. He did not know that an agent of the secret police was among those present, and that he himself was soon to pay dearly for his call to liberty, equality, fraternity. On April 23, 1849, Dostoevsky was arrested and placed in a cell of the fortress of Saints Peter and Paul. He spent 8 months there, and his health became much worse. He could not eat because of the pains in his stomach. He was tortured by hemorrhoids. At night, he was seized by onslaughts of the familiar mystic horror, and if he did manage to doze off, he had nightmares. As he himself put it at that time, I was living only on my own means, my head alone and nothing more. Everything has gone into my head, and from the head into thought, everything, absolutely everything. On the 22nd of December of the same year, after the horrifying ordeal of the mock execution, where he had waited for the end to come at any moment, he wrote Michael, I did not whine and did not lose heart. Life is life everywhere. Life is within ourselves and not in externals. There will be people near me, and to be a man among men and to remain a man for all time, that is what life consists of. That is its problem. I am aware of this. This idea has become part of my flesh and my blood. Yes, true enough, that head which used to be creative, which lived the higher life of art and has become accustomed to the higher demands of the spirit, that head is already lopped off my shoulders. Can it be that I shall never pick up a pen? I think there is a chance of my doing so 4 years from now. My God, how many images lived through, created by me, will perish anew, will become extinguished in my head, or spread through my blood as bane. Yes, if it will prove impossible for me to write, I shall perish. Better 15 years of solitary confinement, but with a pen in one's hand. Farewell. Now I tear myself away from everything that was dear. It hurts to leave this behind. It hurts to break oneself in two, to tear the heart into halves. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, after he had said farewell to Michael, 8-pound irons were welded onto Dostoevsky's legs, and he was placed in the sleigh, which was to transport him as a political criminal for 2,000 miles by way of Yaroslavl and Nizhny Novgorod to penal servitude in Siberia. And we still have not met Maria, going into part 6, which is also rather short. Relatively short. I mean, we're halfway through the Maria chapter, and we do not know anything about Maria. All right, that's all. That's all. Goodbye.